It's 7:15 on the morning of Monday, the 21st of August, 1911, and the Louvre is closed. In a service stairwell off the Salon Carré, a small man in a white workman's smock crouches over a wooden panel no bigger than a large book, Poplar, about 77 centimeters tall, 400 years old, and works it out of its heavy protective case. He knows exactly how that case opens. He built it. He wraps the bare panel in a white cloth, tucks it under his arm, and walks toward the nearest door. Under that cloth is a portrait of a woman with a faint half-smile, a painting that, on this particular morning, is not yet the most famous object in the world. Within a few years, it will be the most recognizable image on Earth, and the man carrying it out the door is the reason why. What Vincenzo Peruggia does not yet know, as he reaches for the exit, is that he is about to accidentally invent a masterpiece. This is the story of the theft that built the Mona Lisa. To understand how a museum handyman walked out of the Louvre with a Leonardo da Vinci under his arm, you have to set aside almost everything you assume about that painting. Because in 1911, the Mona Lisa was not the Mona Lisa. It hung in the Salon Carré among other Renaissance works, admired but unremarkable. It didn't even have a room of its own. It drew no special crowds. Visitors walked past it to reach paintings the age considered greater. If you had stopped a Parisian in the street and asked them to name the most famous painting in the world, very few would have said her name. Everything you know about this painting's fame came after the morning it vanished. Hold on to that, because it changes what the crime actually was. Vincenzo Peruggia was born in 1881 in a small town in northern Italy and came to Paris in his 20s, one of tens of thousands of Italian laborers of his generation looking for work. He found it in the building trades. He was a glazier and handyman, a man who fitted glass and did odd jobs, and at some point he found work inside the Louvre itself. This is the detail the whole story turns on. Peruggia was not an outsider who broke in. He was staff. He had worked in the museum, handled its paintings, and, by multiple accounts, had helped seal the Louvre's most valuable works behind protective glass. Including the Mona Lisa, the man who would steal her had built the very case that was supposed to keep her safe. He knew the galleries. He knew the guards were thin on the ground. He knew the Louvre closed to the public on Mondays for cleaning, and that on a Monday the building filled with exactly one kind of person. Workmen in white smocks, moving freely, invisible, and he knew how that glass case came apart because his own hands had put it together. He did not need a plan worthy of a heist film. He needed a smock and a day off. The traditional account, repeated for a century, though some historians now question the exact timing, is that Peruggia entered the museum on the Sunday evening while it was still open, slipped into a small storage closet, and waited out the entire night. When he emerged at 7:15 the next morning, the Louvre was closed and nearly empty. What happened next is documented. In the Salon Carré, he lifted the small panel off its 4 iron wall pins and carried it into a nearby stairwell. There, out of sight, he took a screwdriver to the protective case and the ornate frame and freed the painting, leaving the frame behind on the stairs, an expensive shell with nothing in it. He wrapped the panel in a white cloth and headed for the exit. And there the escape nearly ended before it began. The door was locked. Peruggia unscrewed the doorknob entirely and pocketed it, and still the door would not open. For a moment he was trapped in a Louvre stairwell with a stolen Leonardo under his arm. Then a man appeared. Not a guard, a Louvre plumber going about his Monday. Seeing nothing but a fellow tradesman in white, the plumber helped him work the door open and let him through. Peruggia walked out into the Paris morning with the most famous painting in the world tucked against his side. The whole heist had taken minutes, and it would be roughly 28 hours before anyone even noticed she was gone. Sit with that gap. A Leonardo da Vinci disappears from the Louvre, and for more than a day nobody realizes it. Blank spaces on the walls were routine that week. The museum's own photographers had been carrying works upstairs to be documented, and an empty set of pins was nothing unusual. When people saw the 4 bare hooks where the Mona Lisa had hung, they assumed she was with the photographers. Nobody panicked. Nobody looked. It was the following morning, Tuesday the 22nd of August, when a painter named Louis Béroux came to the Salon Carré to sketch her, along with the engraver Frédéric Laguilhermie. They found the wall empty. Beyrud asked a guard where she'd gone, expecting the usual answer. The guard went to check with the photography studio. She was not there. That was the moment the cold truth moved through the building. The Mona Lisa was not being cleaned. She was not being photographed. She was simply gone. The Louvre was sealed and shut for an entire week. Around 60 detectives combed the building. Every employee was questioned, several hundred people, and the museum was searched top to bottom. In the stairwell, investigators found the discarded frame. And on its glass, they found the one thing that should have cracked the case wide open. A single thumbprint, left by the thief. They had the frame. They had a fingerprint. Remember that print. It comes back. What they did not have was a suspect. So France went looking for one, and the search turned into a circus. To shake information loose, rewards piled up fast. 25,000 francs from the Louvre, 40,000 from the magazine L'Illustration, 5,000 from the newspaper Le Matin. Le Matin went a step further and offered another 5,000 francs to clairvoyants and fortune tellers who could divine where the painting had gone. And the tips poured in, thousands of them placing the Mona Lisa on a freight train through Belgium, on a ship already steaming for America, in cities all over the map. Every one of them was wrong. Then the manhunt caught two of the biggest names of the century. French police arrested a 32-year-old poet named Guillaume Apollinaire, a leading voice of the Paris avant-garde, and held him in prison from the 8th to the 12th of September. His crime? A former secretary of his, Géry Pierret, really had stolen small ancient statuettes from the Louvre in the past. And in the panic, that connection was enough to jail the poet and accuse him on essentially no evidence of taking the Mona Lisa too. And Apollinaire, frightened, gave the police another name. A friend. A not yet famous 29-year-old Spanish painter who had bought some of those very statuettes. His name was Pablo Picasso. Picasso was hauled in and questioned over the disappearance of the Mona Lisa. By accounts of the episode, he was terrified, barely able to hold himself together. Both men were cleared and released. Neither had anything to do with it. But for a few strange days in the autumn of 1911, the prime suspects in the theft of the Mona Lisa were a celebrated poet and the man who would go on to reinvent modern art. The real thief, meanwhile, did nothing at all. And that was the genius of it, not by design, but by accident. Because while 60 detectives tore through the Louvre and the newspapers screamed and Picasso sweated in an interrogation room, the Mona Lisa was lying flat in the false bottom of a wooden trunk under a bed, in a cramped rented room barely 2 miles from the museum she'd been taken from. Perugia had not fled the country. He had not sold her to a shadowy collector. He had gone home, hidden a 400-year-old Leonardo in a trunk he'd built with a double floor, and gone back to his ordinary life as a laborer. And here is the part that should have ended it. During the investigation, police actually came to Perugia's building and questioned him, reportedly more than once, as a former Louvre employee. They looked at the man. They did not look in the trunk. The most wanted object on the planet sat under his bed while the world hunted for it everywhere else. Now the second half of the accident begins. Because the empty wall did something no one expected, the Louvre reopened after its week-long closure, and people came. In numbers the Mona Lisa had never drawn when she was actually hanging there, just to stare at the place where she used to be, at the 4 iron pins, at the blank rectangle. Witnesses described the crowds filing past the empty space almost as if attending a funeral. The theft became a sensation unlike anything the press had seen. The Mona Lisa's face ran on front page after front page, in country after country. For the first time, her image was mass reproduced and circulated around the world, not as a Renaissance painting, but as the victim of the crime of the century. Postcards, cartoons, songs. A public that had never given her a second glance now knew that half smile by heart because they had seen it 100 times in print under a headline about her disappearance. This is the dark engine of the whole story. The painting became famous not for being looked at, but for being missing. The empty wall was a better advertisement than the masterpiece had ever been. By the time she came back, the world had spent 2 years learning her face precisely because they could not see it. But she still had to come back. And Perugia still had a trunk he couldn't sell. For over 2 years, roughly 28 months, the painting stayed hidden. Whatever his reasons for taking her, Perugia now had the problem every thief of something priceless faces. A priceless thing is almost impossible to sell. You cannot walk the most recognizable painting on earth into a shop. So in the late autumn of 1913, he tried anyway. He wrote to an art dealer in Florence, the city where Leonardo had painted her, a man named Alfredo Geri, who had advertised for artworks. Perugia claimed he had the Mona Lisa and wanted to bring her home to Italy. He signed his letter simply Leonardo and boarded a train south with the painting. Geri, half disbelieving, arranged to meet. He brought Giovanni Poggi, the director of the Uffizi Gallery. In a Florence hotel room in December 1913 with the door shut, Perugia opened the trunk, lifted a false bottom, dug beneath his own belongings, and drew out the panel. Poggi checked the back of it against the Louvre's own catalog markings and inventory seals. It was real. It was her. The two men persuaded Perugia to leave the painting with them for authentication, promising he'd be rewarded for returning it to Italy. He agreed. About an hour later, the police arrived at his hotel and arrested him, in a hotel that would, in the years to come, quietly rename itself after the painting he had hidden there. And now that single thumbprint comes back because it is the reason he'd stayed free for 28 months. At the head of the French forensic effort was Alphonse Bertillon, the pioneer of using fingerprints and measurements to identify criminals. His files held prints on some 750,000 people. And Perugia should have been in them. He had already been arrested twice in France, once for a petty theft that cost him 8 days in jail, once for illegally carrying a knife. His fingerprints were on record. But Bertillon's system had a flaw that reads like a bad joke. He cataloged only the right hand, and the thumbprint the thief left on the Mona Lisa's case was from his left. The one piece of physical evidence in the greatest art theft in history sat in a filing cabinet that had been organized to make it unfindable. They had his prints. They had his print. They simply couldn't connect the two. The largest fingerprint archive in the world defeated by a left hand. Before she went home to France, Italy kept her a while. The Mona Lisa was exhibited at the Uffizi and shown across several Italian cities to enormous crowds, a homecoming for a painting most of them had only just learned to recognize, thanks to the theft. Then in the first days of 1914, she was returned to the Louvre, where she has hung almost ever since. At his trial in 1914, Perugia offered his defense patriotism. He said he had stolen the Mona Lisa to return her to Italy, believing Napoleon had looted her from his homeland. It was a stirring story, and it was false. Leonardo himself had carried the painting to France in 1516, and King Francis I had bought her legally for the French crown. She had not been looted. She had been sold 4 centuries earlier by the artist's own circle. The Italian court was unmoved by the facts and quite moved by the sentiment. In parts of Italy, Perugia was cheered as a patriot. His sentence was cut to a matter of months. By most accounts, he served around 7, and he walked free. He later served in the Italian army in the First World War, married, drifted back to France, and returned to work as a painter and decorator. He died in 1925 in obscurity, a footnote to the object he'd made immortal. And now the number that reframes everything. When the Mona Lisa traveled to the United States in 1962, she had to be insured for the journey. The valuation placed on her was $100 million, roughly $1 billion in today's money. By that assessment, she became the most valuable painting in the world, a record she has held ever since. Today, she is treated as effectively priceless. The French state carries no insurance on her at all, because no policy could mean anything. Set that against the morning of the 21st of August, 1911, when a small poplar panel worth a fraction of the masterpieces hanging around it could be lifted off 4 iron pins by a man in a borrowed white smock, carried past a plumber, and walked out a side door, and no one noticed for more than a day. The theft did not steal her value. The theft created it. There is one last twist in the record, and it deserves to be named for exactly what it is. 2 decades after the crime, in 1932, an American journalist named Carl Decker published a sensational story claiming the real mastermind was a con man called Eduardo de Valfierno, who supposedly orchestrated the whole theft in order to sell 6 forged copies of the Mona Lisa to 6 gullible American millionaires, while the original was safely missing, the conspirators walking away with the equivalent of some $90 million. It is a wonderful story. It is also almost certainly untrue. Historians have never verified that Valfierno existed, and the entire account rests on a single journalist's word, published after the only man who could have confirmed it was dead. It survives because it makes a better legend than the truth. And the truth is stranger anyway. The most famous painting on Earth was made famous by a glazier with a screwdriver, a locked door, a helpful plumber, and a fingerprint filed under the wrong hand. The people who actually shaped the story got very little from it. Perugia died a decorator. Apollinaire, cleared but shaken, died young a few years later. Picasso became Picasso, and rarely spoke of the days he was a suspect in the theft of a Leonardo. And Bertillon's detectives, who fingerprinted several hundred Louvre employees, never once matched their print to the man who had been on their own payroll, and in their own files the whole time. Every day now, tens of thousands of people file into the Louvre and press toward a small, dim painting behind bulletproof glass, holding their phones over the heads in front of them, most staying only a few seconds. Very few of them know that the reason they are standing there at all, the reason her face is on the mug and the tote bag and the fridge magnet, is not entirely Leonardo. It's a locked door, a helpful plumber, a left thumb, and a man who understood, without ever meaning to prove it, that the surest way to make the whole world look at something is to take it away. If you want to know which hidden world we should reconstruct next, tell us in the comments.